His ancient nutrition is such an answer to prayer and a godsend. So if you have issues and you'd like to try it, I encourage you to do so, because we've got to keep physically well. We also have to keep mentally well and spiritually well. And we are going to talk about mental health today. And one of those areas has to do with a targeted attack on our children. And it's dangerous. And we as parents, as prayer warriors, as believers, as intercessors, as family, are obligated to defend them. And I have an incredible advocate here. She is a wife, she is a mother of 3, she's a stay-at-home mom, and she is a mental health counselor. And she is a voice and an advocate for such a time as this. January, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you have been busy for the last 4 years.
Yes.
Very busy. And I know it was something that you never thought you'd do or planned to do. And I so appreciate how you may have been a target, your family, your daughter, an ambush, but you have not let it take you down and take you out. And you're fighting for families, and you're fighting for our young people, you're fighting for curriculum. And so I just want you to share with our viewers a little bit of your life story with your daughter, and then we're going to go into identifying what gender ideology is and this fight that's upon us. And sadly, many people watching don't even realize we're in a fight.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned it's a direct attack on our children, but it's also a direct attack on the family.
You're right.
On the nuclear family, because it really does not only seek to destroy these children, their minds and their bodies, but to destroy the family.
That's right.
And this is having catastrophic impacts on families all over our country and frankly, all over the world. Yeah. This has really hit, Western civilization harder than any other place. And so in 2020, our 13-year-old daughter came to us and told us she no longer felt like a girl. And that one statement put us on this pathway where I found myself now. And, she had no previous confusion over her sex leading up to this announcement. And 3 of her friends at her local middle school had suddenly also started identifying as transgender. And what's important to understand now is you think of that term, and you assume it means a child identifying as the opposite sex or an adult, that has been struggling for a very long time, because that's historically what it was. Right. It impacted predominantly males, and there was usually some kind of precipitating factor, some sort of trauma that caused this young person to become confused.
Correct.
And now, today, children are being taught the lie. It's a false belief system that they have a so-called gender identity. This is completely made up, not measurable, but this gender identity is a feeling that is completely separate from their sex, and they can choose to be a boy, girl, neither, or both. And so the neither or both, you hear words like non-binary, gender fluid, and there are now over 72 gender identities that are being promoted and marketed directly to our children. Yeah. And, prior to this announcement, my daughter would come home and say things like, well, so-and-so is now going by a different name. And I thought, okay, that's odd. That doesn't really fit with what I know to be historically true about gender dysphoria, which is a mental health issue. But it was so rare when I was trained as a counselor in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, most counselors would go their entire career and never have a client that was experiencing confusion over their sex. It was that rare. Yeah. But now we are seeing an explosion in predominantly prepubescent or pubescent girls that are thinking that they were born in the wrong body. And so that's exactly where we found ourselves in 2020 when our daughter came to us. And we were really struggling to understand what was happening with her. As you can recall, during 2020, COVID was blowing everything up anyway. So it was a very confusing time, a very anxiety-provoking time, especially for adolescents who, most adolescents thrive on what's familiar, structure, consistency. And our daughter, she has diagnosed ADHD, but she's also gifted. Yeah. And so sometimes until their IQ catches up, the emotional maturity catches up with their IQ, it can read like someone on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And so when she came to us, we sought help from a mental health counselor to focus on the other issues that she was struggling with, like issues of depression, isolation, and anxiety.
Yeah.
But things began to escalate very quickly. She began asking to be called by a different name, different pronouns. At the time, she was identifying as non-binary. And when school started, I reached out to a teacher via email because we were not allowed on school campus during this time. It was very strict and locked down. But like many times before, I saw the school as a partner. I trusted them.
Right.
And I confided in a teacher that our daughter was struggling, that we were not using the name and pronouns at home, that we had sought help from a mental health professional to help us navigate this with her as a family. And I also let her know that I thought my daughter's confusion was a direct result of her friend group.
Right.
Well, it turns out this teacher was the LGBTQ advocate on campus. I wasn't even aware that a middle school, much less all of the schools, including the elementary schools, had an advocate, a designated person on campus that children could go to.
And she didn't reveal that to you in the email or in the conversation.
She did. There's aspects of that communication that I can't go into because we're still involved in litigation.
Yeah.
But a couple of weeks after school had started, I didn't hear anything further. I knew that my daughter had planned on trying to go by a different name and pronouns, but I didn't fully understand. I thought it would be treated like a nickname.
Right.
So my daughter got into the car and said, "Mom, I had a meeting at school today and they asked me which restroom I wanted to use."
Oh, Father.
I was shocked. I didn't understand why would they be asking my daughter, who is clearly female, which restroom she wanted to use. Like, it was not computing.
And a minor.
13 years old.
A minor.
Who has a 504 plan on file, by the way, meaning they know she's emotionally 11 years old.
Yeah.
And so I immediately contacted the school counselor and said, my daughter said she had a meeting. I would like to know what happened. Why are you asking her about which restroom she wants to use? This is a safety concern I now have.
Yes.
And so I was called back by the guidance counselor and the assistant principal. So right away, I knew something was wrong. And she said, "Mrs. Littlejohn, we cannot give you any information about the meeting we had with your child. They, because my daughter was using they, them pronouns, are now protected by a non-discrimination law." My only recourse was to go to the assistant superintendent, which I did. And approximately 7 weeks later, that's how long it took going back and forth with the assistant superintendent, we were given an in-person meeting with the middle school principal, and we were shown the transgender support plan, that's what they call it, that they had created with our daughter without our knowledge or consent. And this wasn't just about name and pronouns. This was a 6-page document where they asked her questions that would have absolutely impacted her safety. And think about this power differential. There were 3 adults in the room with my daughter behind closed doors. There was the guidance counselor, the assistant principal, and a social worker I had never met. I was volunteer of the year at this school.
Ugh.
They knew me.
January, that's devastating.
And so we were just completely cut out of this critical meeting where they made critical decisions with my child without even notifying us.
Yeah.
If my daughter hadn't said that to me in the car, I would not have even known that they had socially transitioned her. And social transition, this is not a benign intervention. This is a psychotherapeutic intervention that schools are grossly unqualified to be doing because it's the first step toward medical intervention.
Yeah.
So we were devastated. You know, not only were we struggling to understand what was happening with our child, but we felt completely betrayed.
Absolutely.
By the school system and just really concerned about the safety of our child. Her mental health was deteriorating. And it felt like we were living in the twilight zone.
Yeah.
Like everybody was on board with harming our child, and we were the only ones trying to keep her tethered to her God-given body
Yeah.
and the truth.
Yeah.
It was quite a scary time.
Yeah, January, I can't imagine. And unfortunately, she's not the only one. We're hearing this more and more and more. It's becoming more prevalent. And honestly, I think that many people, parents, those in the faith community, leaders, they just don't even know what to do, which is why it is so imperative that your message get out and your resources, which are free, and I'm so grateful for them, get out, because I'm sure someone's watching right now and they're like, we're going through the same thing and we feel hopeless.
Yes.
And we don't even know how to fight it. We don't know where to begin. We can't afford an attorney. Whatever the case may be, we'll just pray, and pray you should. But there's also things that can be done
That's exactly
to
right.
combat it. And so I want you, and I also believe, January, that there are people in the school system, teachers and administrators and principals, that are not on board with this, but they don't want to lose their job. And so what do they do if something is a law or a requirement? So there's just so many questions. So take our hand and lead us down this path.
Sure. So first of all, what parents need to understand, and grandparents, schools are ground zero for this ideology.
Yeah.
This is why often this is referred to as the school to clinic pipeline.
Yeah.
Because this is where a lot of the indoctrination is happening. And so, it's happening in all parts of our culture, which I'll get to, but even in private schools.
Yeah.
Anytime you see inclusivity, DEI, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, anytime you see those words, that means gender ideology is already in that school. And it's manifesting in a lot of different ways. Oftentimes, it's embedded directly into the curriculum, like in California, Oregon, New Jersey. So what that looks like is on a math problem. It'll say 10 non-binary children go to the store.
Yeah.
2 spend, so you're introducing this false
Like
concept
it's
right
normal.
there, like it's normal.
Yeah.
They've completely normalized this false belief system. And so it's really important that parents not only understand what gender ideology is, but that they are actively protecting their children against it. Because it's not a matter of if their child is exposed, it's when.
Yes.
And so I help parents full time now walk their children through this confusion. And I get parents calling me and reaching out to me from all over America,
Yeah.
all religions, all political parties.
Yeah.
And this ideology is so destructive, and it does not discriminate.
Yeah.
And it really does go after the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
But, my husband and I were really naive. We thought if we take the research to the school, because by the time by the time the fall came
Yes.
around and this had happened, we finally started, God just continued to open doors of education and knowledge. Because I did a deep dive into this issue, and I realized what you just said.
Yeah.
What happened to our family was not isolated.
That's right.
And so what had happened was these activist organizations had infiltrated
Yes.
the school system under the guise of anti-bullying and non-discrimination curriculums.
Which is so dangerous.
Yes, and this lie that we can't teach children to be kind to everyone without injecting
Yeah.
this ideology is just such a lie.
Yes.
We can 100% teach children to be kind to everybody without teaching them this false belief
Yeah.
system. Because what's happening is this teaching of this system is creating confusion
That's right.
where no previous confusion existed.
Right.
But we thought if we take this education, if we take Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage,
Yeah.
she was the first person that really wrote extensively about this phenomenon that's been called rapid onset gender dysphoria to describe what's happening with these teenage girls. It's become a social contagion. And unfortunately, after a year of trying to resolve this and get the school to change the policy, to get that in writing, we realized our only recourse was to file a federal lawsuit and go public with our story.
Yeah.
And once we did that, so many parents reached out. They are filled with shame.
Yes.
They are embarrassed. They
Yes.
feel betrayed. They don't know where to turn. Many of these families even feel abandoned by the church.
That's right.
Because the church, if our kids aren't being inoculated and taught the truth, in the church, where are they going to learn it?
That's right.
And that I have been convinced that is the only way to truly win this war.
Yeah.
Because even with great laws like our amazing Governor DeSantis have enacted with our legislature,
Yeah.
the faucet of gender ideology is not turned off.
That's right.
In TikTok, YouTube, social media. Even my daughter, who is an artist, it's on websites like DeviantArt, Scratch.
Yeah.
You can't go on some of these websites, even anime. These pronouns and this ideology is injected into
Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
But back to the schools, it's being taught through sexual education,
Yes.
social emotional learning, and they even have clubs called GSA clubs,
Yeah.
which are Gender Sexuality Alliance. And oftentimes these clubs are being held during the day, not before or after school, so parents don't even know their children are
Yeah.
attending.
That's right.
And these are the most vulnerable kids. These are kids that are on the spectrum.
Yeah.
These are kids that already have co-occurring mental health issues. These are kids that already don't fit in, and they're yearning for that
Belonging.
acceptance and
Yes.
belonging.
Yes.
And I often say, what if those kids had found the FCA instead of the GSA?
Yeah. That's right.
How different would their lives look if
That's
they
right.
found kids that would bring them in to know Christ and to know the truth
Yes. Right.
about their identity, that they're created in God's image, male or female.
Yeah.
And children need to hear that, and they need to hear it often.
Over and over to
That's
combat
right.
the narrative. And
That's right.
And the enemy always overplays his hand, January. That is what he does. Now, how can the church, and by the way, if you are saying, I need this resource, I need to get in touch with January, donoharmmedicine.org is a website you can go to. There's free resources. This one is Church Transgender.
So, yes, and this one's separate. So I'm here in my personal capacity
Yes.
as a mom and a mental health counselor and as a parent advocate. But donoharmmedicine.org is a fantastic organization that are really seeking to fight discrimination and
Yeah.
get identity politics out of medicine.
Yes.
We should not be treating patients based on race or any other identity.
right.
We should be giving them evidence-based care, no matter who they are.
That's right.
And so I helped to create a parent resource page
Yeah.
there at donoharmmedicine.org, and anyone can become a member.
Yeah.
So I encourage your listeners and your viewers to look into that organization and to see, what our mission is.
Yeah.
But this resource I co-authored along with my attorneys and a pastor, and this is written for church leaders, pastors, and parents.
Yes.
And it's a very small fee to download, or you can receive a beautiful hard copy like the one
Yeah.
here. But this is almost 100 pages long. It's a very comprehensive resource so that churches will be armed with what's being taught.
Yes.
And we need to be actively fighting this,
That's right.
not passively.
That's right.
It's past time that, we have to be on the offense when it comes to the hearts and minds of our children. Because let me tell you, they are after them.
They are.
And this ideology destroys everything it touches.
Yes. January, what do you say to a parent whose child has already fallen prey to this ideology?
Yes. So that's a great question. And that is exactly what I do now. I help parents walk their children through this confusion. And by the grace of God, we had to be very intentional with our parenting.
Yes.
The Lord continued to just speak truth into my husband and I so that we knew how to parent our daughter through this.
Yeah.
And after 2.5 years, she is completely free of confusion.
Thank you,
She is on
Jesus.
fire for the Lord.
Thank you,
And in
Lord.
fact, they are on a mission trip in Nicaragua right now.
That is amazing. And that shows you that all of us, everyone listening during our adolescence and through our junior high school days and in our high school days, we were prone to confusion.
Of course.
We were innocent. We were susceptible and to various things that might not have been this severe, but we all bought into something.
That's right.
That now we look back and go, oh my goodness. And thank God we didn't make life-altering decisions and medical decisions and mutilation decisions that we couldn't get free from.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because that's a critical aspect to this, is this isn't just a name and pronoun.
Yeah.
This is leading children to believe that the only way to treat their distress is to become a medical patient for life. And when you pull back the curtain of so-called gender-affirming care, you realize that none of this is evidence-based. That's exactly why Do No Harm and Dr. Stanley Goldfarb really started to look into this and see, okay, well, is this good medicine?
Yeah.
Is this evidence-based?
Yeah.
Is this really helping children? And it's not, which is why we see other countries who have done actual systematic reviews completely moving away from this, because at the end of the day, what they're affirming in these children is self-hate.
It is.
It's encouraging self-hate and disassociation from their natal body, and it's leading children to take off-label puberty blockers and do surgeries such as double mastectomies on children as young as 12.
Without parental consent.
In some states without parental consent, but even with parental consent, parents are being manipulated by the lie that their child will commit suicide if they don't go down this medical pathway. And it's all based on lies. No child is born transgender. No child can change sex.
That's right.
And these doctors and pharmaceutical companies are complicit in the medical scandal that we are seeing.
It's unethical. It's demonic. But you are helping lead the way. And the only way we can change things is to get involved and to take action. And we could talk about this. There's so much more to unpack, January. I appreciate your courage. And we just have a few seconds left, but I just want you to look at the camera and encourage someone that needs hope right now.
Sure. Just know if you're a parent or grandparent experiencing this, you are not alone, and there is hope. And it's just so critically important that we actively fight this ideology by repairing the relationship with your child, getting them outside and away from technology and away from these trans influencers. And please reach out if anybody needs help. I'm happy to help walk them through the confusion and help connect to resources that they need.
Amen. Thank you, January. Thank you for watching. Listen, God is kind, compassionate, gentle. We are not criticizing. We are issuing information and asking you to come home. I'm Jen Mallon. Connect with January and get the help that you may need.